Enterprises struggle to detect advanced attacks quickly and thoroughly as evolving threats continue to evade current security tools. Skillful threat detection starts with diverse, high-value security telemetry to run detections on. The Chronicle platform allows security teams to store and analyze petabytes of data in one place so that you can quickly apply powerful detection rules against all of your security data. Learn more about the Chronicle platform and the latest threat detection capabilities at securityweekly.com/Chronicle. Today's networks are changing fast, and employees, devices, and infrastructures are more distributed than ever. Gigamon Threat Insight is a cloud-native, high-velocity network detection and response solution that's purpose-built to enable you to get in front of this transformation. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Gigamon. Optics has built a platform for SQL-powered security analytics. Extending the OS Query agent, Optics collects, aggregates, and analyzes a wide range of system data and makes that available to solve multiple security challenges. Their solution provides visibility across Linux, macOS, Windows, containers, and cloud workloads. Their customers are using the Optics platform for fleet visibility, intrusion detection, investigation, and audit and compliance. Visit securityweekly.com/upticks and be one of the first to see how they've mapped over 500 behavioral rules to the MITRE ATT&CK framework. Welcome back, everyone, to Enterprise Security Weekly. If you happen to miss Security Weekly Unlocked, that was our virtual conference that happened in December of 2020. You can access all of the content on demand, whether you registered before the live event or not, by visiting securityweekly.com/unlocked, clicking either the button to register or the button to log in. So make sure you go do that because there's lots of cool stuff there. For this segment, we are joined by Allan Alford from the Cyber Ranch podcast and other podcasts as well to talk about supply chain security in the face of SolarWinds. Allan, welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yes. Now, Allan, we were on one of David Sparks' podcasts. What was that one called? I don't remember the name of that one now.
Defense in Depth.
Defense in Depth. So you do that one with David Spark as well as the Cyber Ranch. Is that your own podcast?
Well, so I've left Defense in Depth and launched the Cyber Ranch podcast on my own. I'm going out solo and doing all my own production now. So scary journey, but having fun so far.
Outstanding. Congratulations. It's awesome. Now, Allan, we're going to talk about supply chain security, which is, we've already kind of hinted towards it. We talked a little bit about the SonicWall story and kind of theorizing, like, was it a supply chain attack against SonicWall, or was it just a straight-up attack against SonicWall to get in their supply chain? Like, we've got all these supply chains that are depending on supply chains. How do we get a handle on it, and what should the priority be, more importantly, in our enterprise security programs today?
So I guess I want to step back from the current incident just a moment. And I want to talk about supply chain security in general and the fact that it's always been an issue. It always will be an issue. And it's something that we've always needed to pay real attention to. I think the latest episode, this whole SolarWinds debacle, everything that transpired there has shined some real light on it. And I think if we want to walk away from that experience with a particular pointer or tip that we need to think through, I would argue that the only real pointer or tip we need to think through at this point in the face of that one is this simple fact. Now everyone on the planet knows it's been done once. It's possible it's been done 100 other times, but now everyone knows it's doable. And so copycat, future attacks are imminent. I would argue that now that this is out there in this public, that all the bad guys are now looking at how they can possibly pull this off. So I think we need to be ready in the face of that. But at a high level, like I said at the beginning, I don't know that we need to be any more or less ready than we always should have been.
Yeah, that's a great point, Allan. And we've covered it so many times in the past 15 years. We'll cover an attack sometimes when it's really new and highly theoretical, and we'll cover it because that's our job. That's kind of interesting, but we don't see it in the wild. And you see that with a lot of reports from vendors. They're like, we have this vulnerability, but we don't see it in the wild. But once an attacker or group of attackers pulls off a wildly successful attack and uses one or more of those techniques that maybe in previous times were theoretical or just used by very few people in very obscure attacks that it doesn't really bubble to the surface. Now the question is, should that impact your prioritization of the remediation and defenses against these particular attacks is the real question, right? I think once we see a widely publicized attack that uses a technique, we can kind of surmise that, yeah, if we don't shore up our defenses against it, the probability that someone may use it against us is higher. So it enters that, I think, the probability score in your risk formula, right?
Yeah, if you're looking at impact and likelihood, I think likelihood just went up. It did. Now, as to what we as practitioners can do about it and do against this threat, that's a whole nother conversation. I want to step first through. Let's walk through the problem the same way the bad guys walked through it. It started with a vendor. And it started with a vendor whose actual build process and source code were compromised. It's a vendor whose product is designed specifically to be deployed everywhere, to have tendrils into everybody's everything, to be sniffing and detecting on a constant basis and reporting back to a mothership. And so the bad guys were very easily able to, once they were in that process and into that build tree and into that source code, get it to where, the monitoring and the sniffing were working in their favor. So high value target vendor, let's start with that, and a vendor whose entire code pipeline was compromised. And so we first have to ask ourselves, if we're going to deal with this, not what do we do as general practitioners, but what do we do as folks who might happen to be product vendors, right? And I did product security for 10 years before I became a CISO. I was all about the product side of the game for the longest time. And I'll tell you that it's not just network monitoring and management tools that are at risk here. Telecommunications. Think about the fact that you could compromise a video conferencing system or a telephone, and now you've got basically a bug. You've got a remote listening device and spying device. Think about the fact that you can compromise any kind of, obviously the network tools, but anything else. What about if your EDR or your next gen AV get compromised? Now the bad guys can launch all the attacks they want to, knowing that the EDR has been pre-programmed to not report and not, and to basically ignore this particular attack. So every one of the tools we use has its own degree of attractiveness to the bad guys. And so when we talk about likelihood and impact, I think we first have to triage what's in our supply chain and what matters the most to us. If you're not worried about your telephones, if you're not worried about sensitive information being transmitted over phones, then that should be a lower priority for you. If you're super worried about that you deal with a lot of sensitive information, video conferencing is key to your company. Let's say that Zoom itself gets compromised, right? You have to think through what the impact would be to you for a given vendor. So we start there. And then obviously as the vendors, this should be the wake-up call to everybody who makes a digital product. Everybody needs to be looking at their build process. Everybody needs to be looking at their digital signature process. Everything that they're doing to ensure the integrity of the product they're selling to us. I want every vendor out there to be wide awake on that one and scurrying and hurrying right now on that. And then for us practitioners, it's a matter, I think, of stack ranking what priorities we have based on what those vendors are and what they do in terms of our information processing.
Tyler, Adrian?
Yeah, so Allan, I totally agree with you. I've been working in the AppSec space forever and involved in multiple companies, Veracode, Sonotype, et cetera, that have been supply chain security companies. And I've seen these pops happen in different degrees of scariness, let's call it, in threat, where this is definitely one of the bigger ones, probably the biggest one that's ever occurred. But inevitably, you get the decay of care, right? So it pops and the vendor gets a bunch of money, the one that solves the problem, and indicates, that there's the likelihood goes up. People care. They try to shore things up. And then inevitably that decays over time. How do we fix the problem of spike in care that fades away and then the problem comes back in a year, 2 years? Any idea on that?
Right. So I've got a show coming up that I recorded with Omkar Arsaratnam, and we had this exact conversation. We talked about, he's got this great metaphor for it. When you're crossing the street, you look both ways. Every time you cross the street, you don't just check once a year. You don't just check once a quarter. And so we have to look at all the tooling and all the things we do today to address third-party risk. So let's put on the practitioner hat now. And we're talking about what do we have? Let's talk about everything that's at our disposal today that we use. Let's see, there's questionnaires, which could be proprietary, could be something like SIG-Lite. There's GRC tools who focus and track on third-party risk, and you can plug all the stuff in and track it and monitor it that way and keep it alive that way. To your point about you can become deadened to it or whatever might happen, you can track and keep alive in those tools. You've also got open source intelligence tools, like the third party tools that do the sort of the credit score style approach that look at open source intelligence. And I've got a huge complaint with that whole niche of our industry, that I think the open source intelligence is of dubious value if it's even accurate in the first place. So I don't, I appreciate the real time aspect of that, but I don't know that I'm in agreement that that's really a meaningful set of data to be doing real time though. So I would argue that upping our game with the GRC tools is probably where we need to focus, upping our game with the questionnaires, coming up with more targeted questionnaires, and doing that right to audit, and actually spending the cycles renewing the questionnaire and renewing and exercising that right to audit. I think this becomes a people and process equation in terms of what we have to spend to try to tackle and address. And I think that that's the area we're going to have to focus on. I don't know that there's a magic bullet from a technology perspective where we can just assure ourselves that, my phones are safe, my video conferencing is safe, my EDR is safe, my network monitoring is safe. It's going to have to be a people and process story.
I totally agree. It's people, process. And then from a technology perspective, it's upgrading our security tools and technologies from being snapshot point in time style solutions to continuous, and flipping from sample-based analysis or sample set analysis to population-based analysis, where you're literally looking at everything continuously. And I think we're moving towards that as an industry, but we're just in the beginnings of that vision.
Agreed. And I would argue too that the migration to SaaS actually has a play here as well. The bad thing is going to happen. And so the original question was, how do we, prevent the bad thing? What do we do about it? But the follow-up question is, what do we do when it occurs? Because it will occur again. And I hated the fact that in this case, with this particular vendor, everybody had to wait on a patch, furiously go apply the patch, wait a couple more days for the next patch, furiously go apply that patch. If this was a SaaS-hosted real-time solution, it would have been so much easier on the remediation side. So I think we can't neglect that either when we talk about real-time.
It's interesting. We're talking about preventing, detecting, and mitigating sabotage, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly what's going on. And coming from a vector that you don't have the same control and the same finesse over.
I still get anxiety every time I update my Linux systems and I run the apt command, and I'm just trusting that all the software is coming down from a trusted source, that they got it from a trusted source, that the open source projects have maintained integrity in their own code bases. It's a scary exercise every single time.
Yep. And what we've learned, and with open source, the value and the benefit is, in theory, if we have the time, and of course, who does this, you could comb through all that code yourself and verify and satisfy to your own satisfaction, right? Like, oh, okay, we're cool. There's no backdoors. There's no sneaky Pete, riders or hitchhikers or bad things embedded in this code. And it's the non-open source, to me, that's even more scary. We saw that with the SolarWinds breach, they were targeting still other pieces of the supply chain, right? They went after Microsoft. They went after Cox Communications. And so those are the things where you don't have that ability to look at source code. Those are the things where you're truly just trusting that this vendor has done everything they're supposed to do and, check the box and go. So it's a very different story, I think, with closed source than open source.
Well, and you're right. Even if the closed source, we did have the ability to audit it or look at it, who's got the time? The scale is so huge. The number of third-party vendors you have, the number of things you're pulling, you're apt updating or pulling from any one of the other, whether they're gems or NPM or there's so many repositories, WordPress plugins, that we're trusting every day, even Chrome extensions. It's everywhere. That problem is everywhere.
It is, and it's another argument for why we should always be trying to consolidate tech stack. There's obviously a million other benefits to consolidating your tech stack, but you're eliminating attack surface every time you drop a vendor from your pile, right? That's the way to think of it.
Yeah, I don't know where I was saying this, if it was on a show or off a show, but I was theorizing that you look at the solutions that are out there, and maybe Microsoft has some solutions that you can adopt that don't require you go get another solution from another third party. Because inherently, if you're a Microsoft shop, most companies are, you trust Microsoft. So I'm going to extend that trust and go, I'm going to let Microsoft do that for me, because I don't have to go out to maybe someone like Solarwinds and get that extra management. The problem is large vendors like Microsoft don't do everything all that well, right? They do some things really well, and other things you're like, yeah, they sort of meet the requirements, but the reason people go get SolarWinds is because that meets requirements more closely to what they actually are, that the provider that you have to inherently trust already does, right? Do you have those conversations at like the CISO level, Allan, in your background? Like, how do you consolidate and make some of those decisions in guidance for our audience?
Absolutely. The Microsoft argument is always put forth by the business, because the business sees the benefits of consolidation, and they come to me and they want to know, well, why don't you want Microsoft for this particular niche of your shop? And the answer is just like you said, well, because it's a subpar solution, quite frankly. Anybody who tries to be everything is never going to be an A+ at everything, and there's always going to be somebody who only does the one thing and is an A+ at that one thing. So yes, these conversations take place all the time. They're usually business conversations. They're usually led by dollar conversations, and the security conversation is secondary. And there have been times that I've had to beat the drums so loudly, and there have been times I've lost that fight, for that matter. But even if you're looking at the point solutions of A+, I think you can visit your tech stack and look at what you're doing as a whole and still come up with reductions anyway. You know, like to your point, throw everything you can to Microsoft's way. And when you're not using Microsoft, make sure that it's strategic, make sure that one tech is actually needed and really adding value. Try to pick a technology that's covering multiple other techs, that it's, you know, every time you displace, try to displace more than one. A good example would be SASE, for example. Like, look at, you know, and I don't want to name names, but there's a very popular one out there that if you look at everything it's doing, you have to a certain extent displaced VPN, you've displaced VDI, you've displaced some identity and access management capability. You know, there's a lot of things you can do to dogpile onto the right tech, and always be scanning the field for that new tech that's going to let you pull two things from your shop and replace with one. Yeah.
I also feel like the telecommunications is one, you know, and we're trying to get a handle on it in my daily work, but, you know, I have to go to Zoom, and then you have to do the Skype, and then you have to do the Ring Central, and then your Teams for some. It's like the consolidation gives you that smaller attack surface and allows you to focus your security efforts on that one smaller tech stack, which is, I think, a huge benefit. If we talk about things you could do to really, truly increase the security posture of your organization, consolidation is key, but you don't want to cripple the business either.
Yeah. So yeah. You know, talking about the telecom, you know, I think that's a piece a lot of people wouldn't think about, you know, and I feel like the other big factor here, you know, we talked about just the depth of how many things you have, how many vendors you have, and places that you're getting, you know, code is coming into your organization that you have attack surface on, you know, but also, yeah, as a security leader, you know, there's the breadth of things you have to worry about. You know, I was joking in the Discord here, calling it security attention deficit syndrome. But honestly, you know, as a security leader, you know, or even as a whole team, you've got so many attention tokens, and you know, let's say 10 tokens and 3,000 things to spend them on. What do you spend them on? You know, do you spend them on attack surface? You know, like supply chain types of attacks, or, you know, like, and I think you're right, Allan, you know, talking about, you know, it starts with questionnaires, you know, figuring out where those gaps are. But I think that's one of the big challenges, is there's so many things vying for our attention as security leaders. How do we decide where to spend it?
Yeah, I think in general, you have to fall back on the basics. And this is where I said at the very beginning, you know, this shouldn't have changed too much about what we're doing today. The fact that the SolarWinds thing occurred shouldn't have changed too much, because at the end of the day, it's business first, risk second, technology third. And if you are assessing business risk appropriately, there will be times that significantly overlaps with third party. There will be times that third party is way off to the side. And even if, you know, whatever, we were talking about various examples. Let's say your Zoom somehow gets completely compromised, but you know for a fact that you only use Zoom for your marketing team. And, you know, the worst case scenario is somebody could hack the video call and learn about a marketing campaign a day or two before it's released. Like, what's the actual risk to the business? Very minimal, move on. Versus a vendor who's, say, a source code management, you know, let's say it's GitHub or somebody, you know, and all the crown jewels of your company is a tech company. That's the crown jewels. That's a vendor you're going to really focus that energy on. So to me, it's just the usual assessing business and assessing risk formula.
And it's a constant assessment too. You know, if there's one thing spending much of my life in technology is that technology sometimes gets better and sometimes it gets worse, but you have to constantly assess it to learn where it's shifted. I feel like Teams is one of those things where I was like, wow, that's really crappy. And then you look at Skype for Business, I'm like, wow, that was even, if it's possible, that was like even crappier. But today, I was like, all right, Teams seems to be doing better. And so we started using Teams for our internal meetings. I'm like, actually, it's not bad, right? Like it actually gets better. So I think we have to constantly assess all of these technologies, which is, we talk about job security, but that's not the point, is that constant assessment requires that constant effort and time.
And it's interesting having this conversation with vendors as well, talking to, I know a lot of folks over at Cisco. They're one of the primary sponsors behind B-Sides Knoxville, which I helped organize. And there was a particular team that I know a bunch of people from here in Knoxville. They assess, a big part of what they do is looking for threats internally, looking for issues like supply chain type issues internally. And they talk about what a challenge it is, because Cisco makes, I forget how many acquisitions per year, but there's this constant influx of new technology, new companies with products. They might be hardware products, they might be software products, they might be in the cloud. And I say might, but I think they cover all three of those categories in every quarter of every year with their acquisitions. And this team has to, it takes time to go through all that, and you just hope that the team gets through it, before bad guys find anything in it.
Yeah, there's a real analog there with the M&A process, right? Any good CISO of any company that's done any acquiring, and the company knows, to properly use their CISO, the CISO gets brought forth into M&A always, and you end up having to do these types of deep investigations into the company and its practices, its attack surface, its controls. There's an analog there for sure. I think you're onto something, that the same vetting and the same diligence we do when we're about to acquire someone ourselves, maybe we take that and we apply that to the vendor community almost with the same amount of rigor. And again, it's a people and process story. Where's the money? Where's the time? But you're hitting on something there, I think.
Well, also there's the balance of that time and resources to swap out some technology. And when you look at that, I'll go back to SolarWinds for that example. I think there was some conversation at some point, since this broke, that, everyone should just rip out SolarWinds and replace it with something. I'm like, there was a reason why all those big companies in the Fortune 500 and governments used SolarWinds, and they've probably been using it for a long time. And in my experience, ripping and replacing something like that is not to be taken lightly. Also, I don't know if this is controversial or not, but I tend to see when a company does suffer a breach, they're like really secure after that. Like they've been through this exercise. Like if I were the CISO, I'd be like, look, we're sticking with SolarWinds, right? Because we're going to address the issue. We've done the evaluation. We use it for a reason. Here are the reasons. And you know what? They're going to be really secure moving forward. Is that not out of the realm of, the conversations that take place?
Oh, I think it's perfectly valid. We had at the beginning of the show the statement of, fatigue, alert and awareness fatigue, that eventually after 2 years you've given up, right? The company that got that breached that publicly, after 2 years, they have not given up. Yeah. They've got this deeply ingrained never again mantra, and they're going to live by that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's something I've always pointed out, talking about breaches over the years is, do you want to go with a company with the spotlight on them? Or do you want to go with one of their competitors that have never had that spotlight shown on them?
So stick with SolarWinds is what we're saying. I know it sounds backwards, but I really believe it's true.
Our lawyers would like us to say that's not an explicit endorsement.
Yes, that is correct. We are just, we're yammering is what we do, right? As podcast hosts.
was that an endorsement for Yammer?
Yeah, no.
Oh,
no.
man, no.
Allan, tell us a little bit about your podcast that you started.
Yeah, so the Cyber Ranch podcast, the fundamental premise is I'm the sole host. We don't have a bunch of hosts, which puts a lot more burden on me. But what I'm trying to do is pick one expert guest each show. It'll be another CISO practitioner, somebody who's just really knowledgeable about some facet of the game. I'll interview that guest, peppering in a bit of my experience here and there, depending on how qualified I am to do so. The first show we're launching is actually, or one of the first shows we're launching anyway, is behavioral economics as it relates to cybersecurity. Like, this is a topic I know next to nothing about, so I'm letting the expert go. Other times it might be a more casual chat between two CISOs, but the idea is one topic per show. And the most important part is I want it to be a topic that the guest cares about. I want it to be something they're passionate about. And we're not just going to cover the topic. We're going to cover why are you passionate? What motivates you about this topic, about being in cybersecurity in general, and what keeps you in the game? So I think hearing about people's passions really aids the process when you're trying to understand and onboard the technical information as well.
Outstanding. Where can people find the new podcast, Allan?
Hacker Valley. I am with the Hacker Valley family now. So go to
nice.
hackervalley.com. You'll see the Cyber Ranch podcast link right there on the menu. And I'm very proud and very happy to be working with those guys, Chris and Ron, over at Hacker Valley.
Yeah, great stuff coming out of Hacker Valley. So outstanding. Allan, thank you for appearing on Enterprise Security Weekly. That will conclude this episode for this week. Thanks, everyone, for listening and watching. See you next time.